It may not exactly be top of mind for you that 6 months ago, municipal elections took place across Ontario, but in one place, the provincial capital, that race was accompanied by a significant change that's now playing out in the day-to-day politics of the city. With no warning or consultation, and even with a willingness to use the Constitution's notwithstanding clause, the new provincial government almost cut in half the number of sitting councillors. They said it would save money and improve governance. Has it? Let's find out as we ask Shelley Carroll, Toronto City Councillor for Ward 17, Don Valley North; Stephen Holyday, Toronto City Councillor for Ward 2, Etobicoke Centre; and Gabriel Eidelman, Assistant Professor, Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. And we are happy to have you back, I think, for the second time? Yes. Councillor, for the first time?
Yes.
Yes, indeed. Welcome here. Shelley, nice to have you here again.
You bet.
Let us start, because we convened a bit of a discussion about this issue back in September, before the election took place. We want to play about a minute's excerpt from that program just to set up the discussion that we're going to have here, okay? Sheldon, if you would, the clip, please.
I think what Doug learned working on council is that council doesn't work.
Right.
And it doesn't. And it's not about the people on council. It's not. It's about the structure of council. It's about the fact that they're all equal, that in the midst of a debate on subways, someone can stand up and move a motion to ban plastic bags, and the whole council gets sidetracked down a rabbit hole. That shouldn't be possible. They have a committee structure that doesn't do anything, because you can vote one way at committee and then vote the opposite way at council. Everything is relitigated again at council. Why have a committee structure then?
These are the kinds of issues that have been raised as demonstrations of Toronto's ineffectiveness as a council. And I'm telling you that there are smaller councils in this province that have struggled and fallen apart, and the same divisiveness with 8 and 10 councillors. You can shrink it to 25. But there's no evidence that that's going to make it more effective or less dysfunctional. I would also dispute that it's dysfunctional in the first place. I mean, yes, there are political divisions on city council, but it doesn't prevent them from making decisions, and the decisions don't always go the same way.
Let's follow up. Shelley Carroll, part of the idea on having a smaller council was that it would make decisions more efficiently. Do you?
Well, it makes decisions more quickly, but whether or not they're more efficient and whether or not they are the best decisions, that hasn't changed. We can still go awry in the middle of a discussion. We have procedural rules to guide us away from making those kinds of mistakes. But I'll give you a quick example. We made a decision on second suites just in the most recent council session.
You might want to explain what those are.
Building a second suite into a single-family dwelling is something that can happen anywhere in the city. And once again, the historical downtown versus how this will play out in the suburbs divide was still there. And some things like that in council's culture can't be eradicated by changing the number. There are lots more things that we need to do to the culture of the city to make the changes that fix that.
Stephen, what's your view on it?
Well, it depends whose shoes you're talking about. Whether it's my shoes, I think it is much better, but I want to look at the citizens' shoes. And this example is community council. That's an important place where citizens go and interact with their government. We rely on citizens' input to make decisions. When you have a community council that runs for 3 or 4 hours instead of all day, where visitors or speakers have to sit through 6, 7, 8 hours of deputations before it's their turn to speak, they get a chance to get right up to the podium and speak to us directly as councillors. And then we can act decisively on those decisions with a smaller community council. So I think it is making better decisions because we have better public input.
What's your view?
So I think in terms of speed and efficiency, just back of the napkin calculations this morning, you've spent less time. These are fresh faces you're seeing because you've spent 20 fewer hours at full city council than at the same time last term.
Does that make it better?
Not necessarily. So I would say, I think I'd have to agree with Councillor Carroll here in terms of we really have nothing to go on in terms of deciding whether it's better or worse. So what are our criteria, right? Are we making more informed decisions? Not sure. The same reports are coming to councillors. There's not much time to read those reports. Just a few days ago, we had a new report on transit, hundreds of pages to go through. Will the decision after reading those reports be better informed? Unclear. What are we doing in terms of public engagement? Community council is one thing that I'm sure we'll bring up again. In terms of providing opportunities for residents and citizens to actually feel like they have a say in what's going on and the decisions that are being made, changing the number of councillors on the full city council doesn't change how the city actually engages with the citizens. So it's unclear whether it's better.
Shelley, one thing I have heard is that when there were 47 councillors in the past, you know, oftentimes it all got said in the first few speakers, but yet every politician wanted to get up and wanted to bloviate and say the same darn thing over and over again just to get on the record or be on TV or whatever. Is there less bloviating now?
I don't think we've put that to the test. We haven't had some of the challenging reports because in a new term, it takes staff a few months to start to load the really difficult decisions that we need to make into the hopper. So we haven't really put that to the test. But I'll put you to I'll have you think about other cities. When we have a one-sided conversation, community can come and speak to us, but they can never question us. When we get into the council chamber, we get a brief period to question the staff, but then every councillor, however many they are, feels they have to now speak back to the community, here's what I'm thinking and why I'm about to vote the way I'm supposed to vote. So the really meaningful changes we need to make to council are happening in places like Montreal. They have community question period in committees and in their council session. There's a period set aside where a member of the community can come and say, I have this fundamental question for you regarding this issue.
You can come and ask a question of a councillor
Right.
at a committee, at a city council meeting.
And they're finding that really holds people to account. And those who really don't want to answer that question hold back. And you start to see, you know, an opinion forming right there in the room that really includes the community. Those are the types of things that would address real access to government and would address proper representation that we haven't yet touched on.
Okay. Can I get you, Stephen, on whether you think there are fewer of those annoying speeches that drone on and on and on and on to no particular purpose?
Well, bloviated is a nice word. I'm sure members of the public that may have seen council would use harsher words. But there's an old saying, you know, idle hands make the devil's work. And when, as a councillor, you sit in those sessions and you see things go on and on and on, and the same points get repeated and there isn't new ideas, people tend to stray off onto tangents and get us into trouble. One of the observations I've made of council is we seem to be spending more time maybe fighting with another level of government, such as the province. Now, whether that has to do with the politics of the day and the sentiment of council and the politics of that level of government, there is more time for councillors to dive into those areas of focus. And it begins to stray away from the core businesses and the core decisions that we need to be keeping our eyes on as a city.
Okay, one of the core businesses you have as an elected person is you have to attend to the needs of your constituents.
Agreed.
In the old system, when there were 47 of you, how many constituents roughly did you have in your area?
Approximately 60,000.
How many have you got now?
About double that, 120,000.
How has that changed what you can do?
Well, I've given a lot of thought to this, and the best example I could use is the recent snowstorms in Toronto. It should come as no surprise as a suburban councillor. I get a lot of calls after a snow event. People are naturally concerned with their roads being plowed, their driveways being cleared. You know, in a previous storm, we might have had 10 or 15 calls. Now we might have 20 or 30 calls. I've got some great people on staff, and in fact, I've added to my staff to be able to do those type of constituency services. But as I'd always argued, the neighborhood on one side of Kipling is the same as it is on the other, and we know how to handle those calls well. So there is an economy of scale. We're able to continue to act efficiently to take those calls. So I would argue back that customer service hasn't gone down. We are good at what we do in the office, in my opinion,
Okay, let me
and
find out
we
from-
handle those things as they come up.
Your constituents have doubled in size as well, I presume?
Just about. I had about 70,000 and I'm at 120 as well. We were at 44 councillors. A long process recommended 47 to account for some
You're
of the
right.
additional population.
I added it and it wasn't there. You're right.
But here's the challenge that we face. I would argue with respect to Stephen's statement that the neighborhoods are the same on either side of the street. What each of us is dealing with now are the unique natures of each of the new neighborhoods. So for the public service, it's almost as if there are 25 new councillors, because each of us has a new territory, wants new things looked at and addressed. And so we're putting a lot of pressure on the public service right now. That will adjust over time.
Can you keep up with the workload, though?
Well, I have most of the Shepherd subway all in one ward now, all save and except the Yonge Street station. And so there's huge growth, huge development consideration, and representation and access to government really comes into the fore in those discussions. Getting out and engaging everyone who needs to be engaged in that is really challenging for me. I worry that in matters as important as development coming into your neighborhood, I'm not going to be able to engage enough. So we're looking at newer methods and electronic methods being far more employed to get out to people fast so that I can engage, because there is no question that access to me and my team has been reduced. We've enlarged the team, but we also have to change the way we do it to deal with those types of ongoing issues in the city.
What does your research show in terms of how much more difficult it is to attend to the needs of 120,000 people instead of 60 or 70,000?
Clearly, it's a challenge, and I really commend the councillors for making a decision for first to increase the staff available and to make sure that there are still avenues for constituents to reach their offices. But I think what's also at play here is, so first, just put it on the table. There was no magic number for the perfect amount of councillors that would somehow reach this pinnacle of democratic representation.
Well, the province picked what it picked because it's the same number of MPPs and the same number of MPs.
It's a matter of practicality.
Right.
It wasn't
So they
based
all
on any empirical
represent the
evidence,
same rights.
right? And
Yeah.
there's pros and cons to that. But I think one of the consequences that we're seeing, and that we'll see more and more, because we're still very early on in the term, and what I think we'll see more and more is that because of the demands placed on yourselves and your colleagues and the offices in terms of constituency work, we might start losing track of the bigger picture issues, the citywide issues that we are all facing, that the challenges are mounting. And so when we're stuck focusing on all of the little things that need to be happening in our local neighborhoods, in our constituencies, it will be, I think, more difficult to focus on the bigger picture.
Hold off on that. I want to come back to that because that's a great point. But one of the reasons we were told that reducing the size of council was going to be beneficial to people was that it was going to save $25 million a year. It would cost less. Stephen, I just heard you say you've added to your staff in order to deal with all of the larger number of constituents that you have. If you've had to hire more people to do your job, I presume you haven't been able to save any money. Is that right?
I don't agree with that. There's still one less councillor's office when you consider the circle drawn around my ward. So that's less of a councillor's salary and less of an army of people to support that. I incrementally increased the resources in my office. And I think that's an important point. Now, is there a magical amount of savings that's just around the council budget, and is it worth reducing council in half to save a few $1 million? That's a question that we can debate. But I'll leave you with this thought. You know, I always joke out in the West End in Etobicoke, there's a line worn in the carpet from my councillor's constituency office up to the Transportation Services Department. I spend a lot of time working with them because I get a lot of calls on transportation-related issues. But that manager that I deal with has to deal now with 5 councillors instead of 11. And so his workload has gone down. There's still a lot of calls and service requests, but his life has become much easier because of the amount of resources that he has to allocate dealing with less people. And that's where you begin to see some of the efficiency in the system that you can't put your finger on, but it's in there.
You looking at the look on her face?
Yeah.
She's looking you look like you're from Missouri right now.
Yeah. Well,
Have you saved any money because it's a smaller council?
Dollars and cents. Look, councillors in the city of Toronto, prior to this change, cost each taxpayer about $13.40. And now we cost them $13. The reason being all that we have saved is the salary and the benefits of that councillor and maybe 1 or 2 staff members, because while we increase the envelope, I'm not using every single staff member allowable there. Stephen's not. But downtown councillors who have 120 and growing are using them all.
120,000.
Yeah, Kristen Wong Tam, for instance, we were so out of whack that Councillor Wong Tam in the downtown core has fewer constituents than she had before this change. That's how out of whack and inequitable it was. But the savings is really a false economy, just as it was when we amalgamated the city. We saved the few individual representatives, but at the end of the day, we burned through the mitigation money, and The cost of running the city is driven not by the politicians, but by the people themselves. And we have the same 3 million people. By the end of this year, we will be a population of 3 million, and they haven't changed. Their needs haven't changed. And the public service is finding that while there are fewer councillors, we're still addressing the needs of constituents, which means their workload has changed very little.
I see Stephen brandishing maps. Let me ask the director. Sheldon, which camera do you want him to show these maps to? Camera 1. Okay. If you want to pick them up and show camera 1 right in front of you.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on that point. I believe that the councillor's office budgets and their salary utilization rate is really a manager's philosophy in that office about how you want to staff up. Wards are different across the city, but I would make the argument that the workload isn't necessarily inequitable. It's just different. But if you want to look at differences in the ward, you talked about Christian Long Thames ward. That's the smallest ward in the city, and I took some maps that were to scale. Look at the land area difference between that and say, my ward.
That's your ward on the left?
Completely different. Now, I don't know exactly what the staffing numbers are, but they are publicly available, and it would be easy to contrast on the amount of money that I spend on that compared to her, and it's a different land area, probably a similar amount of population.
But a different kind of population and presumably different needs of your respective constituents.
Different needs. It is still a lot of work to serve constituents, but the point I want to make is councillors approach it differently. And we all work long days, as do our staff. And I think it's a fair question from the public to ask why you fit up your office with 6, 8, 9 people versus somebody that might have 2, 3, 4, or 5.
What does the record tell us about whether or not these kinds of reimaginings or reamalgamations or downsizings actually save any money?
Well, they don't over the long term, but and that's just because you have to rejig things around and there's costs involved, so there's transaction costs involved with that. But just to pick up on what Councillor Holyday is mentioning here in terms of savings, absolutely you can pull savings out of this process in terms of your constituency work, and a lot of that has a symbolic value, but we're talking about a drop in the bucket here, right? In terms of what the city is spending on, we have many, many projects in the order of billions and billions of dollars that we don't know where the money is coming from. And, playing around with councillor budgets and offices, that's not really going to help us solve those problems.
Well, taxpayers might say, a few drops in this bucket, a few drops in that bucket, pretty soon you got a full bucket.
We don't have enough buckets.
We don't have enough buckets, all right?
Well, I still think, I'm sorry, Shelley, I was going to say, I still think it's a question of leadership. And if the council sets the tone, then the tone trickles through the public service.
I would agree with that.
And a classic example is in our first council meeting, we had a bunch of options put forward to us about how to handle the councillor's office budgets, because we went into an election period and came out of it in a completely different structure. And council went for the biggest one, the brass ring, the largest budget. And I argued at the time, we don't even know what we need. Why don't we approach this with some modesty, and if we find we're running short through the year, then we'll have that debate. But we went for the largest budget. We took basically the pie and divided it up into 25 pieces instead of 44.
Mistakenly, in your view, I gather.
Well, mistakenly in my view, but it sent a message. And it sent a message through the public service that, well, council's not concerned about its budgets. It's just going to take the money it has and spread it out amongst each other. Well, how do you think they will approach us when it comes to budget and for the management of projects?
You're on.
So I'm an accountant, not a certified one, but that's my jam. And when you set a budget, you want to set envelopes. What is the max that's going to be needed? We were using inappropriate accounting prior to the rejigging, because in the wards that they had reached 100,000 or above, they needed more than was in our envelope of 4 staff members each. So we were beginning to hold budgets in other places to provide an extra body to those people. So we sat down and looked at this and said, let's set the envelope for the wards that will be at their max. Places like the former Trinity Spadina plus Fort York is now one big ward.
Downtown.
Yeah, they need a lot of staff. Some of us who have a lot of growth going on need our own planner. We need professional staff. So what we said is set the envelope so that it meets everybody. Those who don't use the whole envelope will create a surplus, and every public budget needs a surplus at the end of the year that can be used to go to those places that need better investment. And so that's what we did with the first envelope. Happily, Stephen's not using all of it. I'm not using all of it. So there will be a surplus. But we know that within the properly accounted for envelope, everyone's needs are being met all the way up to the most populous wards, Councillor Wong Tam, Councillor Billion, and Councillor Cressy.
Okay. Can I ask everybody to get comfortable for a second while I set up this next area of interrogation here? Some of us are old enough to remember the old Metropolitan Toronto Council, which was 2 tiers of government, a metro level, and then 6 cities, all of which had their own councils. This is pre-amalgamation days. And there were a lot of politicians on all of that. Then Mike Harris came in and created the megacity, a single tier of government, a largish council.
Right.
How many councillors on that one? It was 47, I think?
Yes.
Yeah, it was
yes.
47 for that one,
Yeah.
but a single tier. Now we have still a single tier, but it's half the size. So you can see the direction that this has been going in over the past few decades. You come on in first on this. As the progression continues to wind its way through, and presumably this isn't the last word on municipal restructuring, I mean, the next generation will figure out its own thing. What's the next step?
Well, that is a good question. So these 2 councillors, for example, are on a new committee that council has struck to consider those kind of questions. And as it happens, I'll be presenting to them in a few days with some of my ideas.
You want to tell us what you're going to tell them?
Well, so I was part of a project initiative called the City Hall Task Force, which is something that was organized at the University of Toronto, where I, along with Brian Kelsey, now at the Toronto Region Board Trade, he was on this program, I think, not too long ago.
A few nights ago, yeah.
We convened a panel of former city councillors, civil servants, city managers, political staff, academics, and civic leaders to come up with some ideas to, well, what we consider practical changes.
Give us one.
One idea. So, I was mentioning earlier that we really hope that council we wish that council would think of the big picture issues a little bit more. And so we had a range of ideas, beginning with the mayor, in terms of how you could set priorities that focus on citywide issues. And that begins with the budget. We have a former budget chief here sitting with us. Everything
That's
comes
Shelley.
down to, that's Shelley Carroll. Everything comes down to the budget in terms of identifying the priorities that council believes we should be investing in. And so we set up ideas of how we change the process, not structurally change council, but the process of how we make decisions. Meaning that right now, it is unclear for even someone like me who follows this stuff closely to really understand what the priorities of this council are in terms of the term of council. So for the next 4 years, what are you collectively trying to accomplish, and how are you communicating that to residents? It's very difficult to figure that out.
Can I ask a follow-up question here, which is maybe, well, I don't know if I should ask you or these two. Let's all get into it here.
Sure.
The mayor is elected citywide.
That's right.
He has a mandate to speak for the whole city.
Democratic legitimacy.
You two are elected in your particular constituencies, and the argument is, as a result, you don't think about the citywide, you think about what's going to play in your particular constituency. Sure. How do we get you two thinking more big picture, citywide priorities, as opposed to, strategically, yes, as opposed to what's only happening in Ward 17 or what's only happening in Ward 2? Go.
Well, we grapple with citywide issues every time we walk into the council chamber. But they are set in the context of the mayor's mandate, because the mayor has a great deal to do with the setting of the agenda. And he has first consideration of it through his executive committee, a hand-picked, he gets to appoint it, committee and appoints all the chairs. So the agenda is set for us, and we have to work within that confine. We're sort of working within his mandate. But I'll tell you, the report that Gabriel did came before the provincial request for reform. Advice we were getting from the community, particularly the youth community, about our lack of democracy around those bigger and more visionary issues, was already coming at us in our own ward boundary consultations. And now, Chair Holyday of that committee has asked for input from the public. And I think it's very telling that what they're asking for is not, we'd like this committee to be about this topic and this many members. They're not talking about those little fiddle around the edges things. They came forward in the main talking about democracy issues. How are you going to build in a layer of democracy that we have real access to underneath your super council with your super wards? How are you going to give us that kind of access that we need and some impact on democracy for the emerging issues that come up post the mayor's election? And they were also looking for electoral types of reform. Like, can we talk about ranked balloting again? Can we talk about campaign finance again? Because they're very concerned that our super ward, super council system has given us not less but more incumbent advantage. And those, I think, are the things that the community really wants us to address in this first term.
Stephen.
Well, it's the age-old question of how do you divide your loyalties to your constituents and those that elected you to what you are shouldered with as city building. And sometimes those don't square up. But I want to go back to the idea of, how do we keep moving the yardstick forward? I do look to the leadership of the mayor, and that particular report spoke about perhaps a stronger mayor system, but the mayor is out there giving speeches, these State of the Union type addresses, and he will give clues in those about where he believes the city is going. One of the advantages of a smaller council, of course, is that you do have more individuality as a councillor and a stronger voice, but it also means that the mayor has a smaller pool of people that he has to work with to try to find some policy alignments and some middle ground to move these things forward. In terms of how do individual councillors contribute to moving the city forward, I think one of the exciting things about the committee system is you can pick, if you can, or at least volunteer for a committee that interests you. I spent some time on infrastructure last term, and I really liked it. I learned a lot about roads and water infrastructure and began to wrap my head around projects that I wanted to try to help champion as a councillor. And there's nothing that holds us back from taking on an initiative and going out there and pushing our big idea. And that we do, and you see those things in the news, but when you have a group of 25, you have better luck trying to push those forward.
Let me pluck one idea out of what you just said. I'll put it over here to Gabriel, and then let's talk about that. He talked about a strong mayor system.
Yeah.
There are municipalities in the United States where the mayor, for example, in a strong mayor system, if he or she doesn't like a decision that council has made, he or she can veto that decision. Yeah. And it's more like a presidential style system. Yeah. We obviously don't have that here. The mayor is one vote out of 25 on council, no more, no less. Yep. What's your view on whether we should adopt a strong mayor system? So
we spent a lot of time thinking about this at the task force, which is still publicly available. People can just Google University of Toronto City Hall Task Force. And one thing that came out of those conversations, which even surprised me, and I think about these type of questions, that's a question I get from students all the time. What should we pick? Should we go for a strong mayor system or not? Should we replicate what's happening in New York, Chicago, et cetera? And one thing that came up in our conversations was, you really have to think about the mayor's powers along two different dimensions. Mm-hmm. It's his or her legislative authority, meaning veto powers, et cetera, his or her relationship with council and councillors, but also their executive authority. Because recall, the mayor is also the chief executive officer of the corporation, the municipal corporation of the City of Toronto. Mm-hmm. Right? So there is authority that comes with being the executive, working with staff, or working with the city manager's office. In our deliberations, we came to the conclusion that the current relationship between the mayor and councillors is probably where it needs to be, where councillors are keeping the mayor in check when they need to keep the mayor in check. And as you mentioned, the mayor has lots of freedom to bring councillors along in terms of a policy agenda. On the executive authority side, this is where things get muddied, and particularly from a resident's perspective, right? If we're thinking about customer service and clients and user and resident and citizen-centered perspective, the executive authority of the mayor is hidden oftentimes, meaning in budget debates, right? The mayor will speak to the city manager's office through a mandate letter, through other types of clues, even in public speeches, and say, this is what I think we should be accomplishing this year. But from the public's point of view, it feels like we're hopping around, different priorities here and there. Nothing is really on the record in terms of what the mayor is saying to councillors, who are supposed to keep the mayor in check, and to the rest of the community and the public at large about what the priorities are for this term, and then going forward for this year, and then going forward for the rest of the term.
Let me get a sense about strong mayor versus status quo from you two. Shelley Carroll, you want to see the more New York City style, Chicago style mayoralty?
No, there are things we should be taking from the New York City model, but I don't believe that by and large Torontonians want the strong mayor model. What they do want is that layer of democracy that sits underneath that strong mayor. The community board system is something that we may have to look at because New York City councillors have about 150,000 people. They are hampered. They're also confined a little by a state party structure. They have Democrats and Republicans, and that sort of feeds and supports the strong mayor model. But there, the mayor has a budget of his own of about $100 million. He's over there in Gracie Mansion, and he meets with council exactly once a year. Once a year, he attends council to give them his budget.
That wouldn't fly here, eh?
And I don't think Torontonians want democracy to be that top-heavy. But what they do often raise is, do you know anything about these community boards? Can we have a community board? And I know from the New York councillors that I know, they sometimes dread that because, you know, if there is a big citywide initiative and the mayor is looking for support for it, and it's something that's come up post-election, as things do over 4 years, he will go directly to community boards. And so he'll be presenting it to the community at the same time he's presenting it to the councillors. And they're sort of blindsided.
Stephen, strong mayor system?
I think it's worth having a discussion, and I take to heart that discussion about the mayor being the CEO or the chief executive officer. You know, political discussions and public policy discussions aside, you know, my dealings with citizens are definitely results-oriented. They want their problem solved. They want something dealt with. They want something fixed. They want some other resources added to something to make it happen. Anything that streamlines the system to get faster results, I think, is a plus and something that citizens would trade off for the risks of putting powers into the hands of a chief executive officer. And the only other thing that you had mentioned as well is just, Councillor Carroll had mentioned as well, is just, you know, looking at the role of the community council and adjudicative boards and maybe even those community boards. There's definite interest in that discussion, but I would caution that with anything that gums up the works further. So now we have to go get two decision bodies to make something happen.
You're not for
or
that.
there's risk of overturning one body or the other. I think people just want their decision, and this is based on my experience at community council. They want to know if their fence is allowed to be this tall or this tall, and they want to get the heck out of there and get on with their life. So we got to keep that streamlined.
We're dealing with a paradox here where we all agree the municipal government is the most transparent level of government and in many ways the most inclusive. But in practice, it doesn't work that way because for all that transparency, we're inundated and residents are inundated with this information that they can't make sense of. So it's actually quite opaque. And for all its inclusion, you were mentioning the agencies and boards and committees, et cetera. There's many points of entry into the decision-making process, but residents have trouble understanding how it all works. And so my advice in terms of regional government, in terms of general municipal and local governance is we need to step back and think about what are we trying to accomplish and what are the problems that are preventing us from solving real challenges.
The fellow from the Munk School gets the last word. Can I thank Shelley Carroll, the Toronto City Councillor from Ward 17, Don Valley North, Stephen Holyday, the Toronto City Councillor from Ward 2, Etobicoke Centre, and Gabriel Eidelman, Assistant Professor, Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the U of T, for coming into TVO tonight and helping us out with this. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.